I'm Jeff Puma. I'm the AME Director of Marketing and Communications. On behalf of AME, thank you for joining us for this webinar, Collaborating with Employees, Improving Culture and Processes. Before we start, I want to remind everybody about the 36th Annual AME International Conference, which takes place October 27th through 29th. Since our conference is virtual, you'll be able to join from anywhere that you can access the internet. The travel costs and time away from your home and your work have gone out the window as a result of the virtual format. Plus, we'll be offering more than 40 hours of content, both live and most of which will be available on demand afterwards. You'll have access to keynotes, practitioner sessions, tours, and other conference programming during the week and for 6 months after. While we've announced a significant amount of the programming, there's still more to come. We'll be adding tours. We have a special supply chain forum and some other content that we'll be rolling out as we lead up to that October 27th through 29th date. You can find out more and register at ame.org/conference. Now, I'm happy to introduce John Dyer. He is an author, coach, and trainer with 35 years of experience in the field of improving processes. His new book, The Façade of Excellence, Defining a New Normal of Leadership, examines the 4 leadership styles required to move an organization's culture to one of trust, collaboration, and teamwork. I've personally gotten to know John a little bit through AME's weekly coffee breaks. He's a regular participant in those idea exchanges, and he contributes great insights. So personally, I'm really excited to hear this presentation, and I know we're all in for a real treat. Before I hand it over to John, I wanted to go through a couple of quick housekeeping items. You'll be muted throughout, but we encourage you to add your questions into the Q&A box at any time so that we have them queued up for the end when we'll take those questions. And I'll also be monitoring the chat and the Q&A throughout in case there's anything that needs clarity or if we need to address anything in real time. Lastly, John has graciously offered to send one of today's participants a free copy of his book. So about midway through the hour, we'll randomly select someone and I'll reach out directly to that person with the details. Now I'm pleased to welcome John Dyer.
All right, thank you, Jeff, and thanks to AME for having me today. I very much appreciate that. So to get started, Jeff already went through my background a little bit. I started my career actually with General Electric, and I've got some examples that I'm going to be sharing later. So that's why I wanted to make that clear. I'm also a contributor to IndustryWeek magazine. I've been writing articles for them for the last 6.5, 7 years. At the bottom of this slide, you can go to that website if you're interested in seeing some of my articles. This deck will be made available for the folks who are registered, so you don't need to write that down. I'm also a judge for IndustryWeek's Best Plants competition. I have been a judge now for the last 6 years, so that's given me a lot of insight to what's currently going on around North America as far as improvement in teamwork and so forth. As far as the actual IndustryWeek magazine, at the top of this particular issue is one of my articles called The Facade of Management Commitment and Why It's So Destructive. That actually became so popular that a publisher contacted me and wanted to know if I would be willing to turn that into a book, and that's the book that Jeff mentioned. Some of the article titles, for those of you that might be interested in going and reading some of the articles, you can see from this list that a lot of them deal with cultural issues, change issues, things like that, because I'm a firm believer that, you know, when implementing Lean and Six Sigma, if you don't also address leadership and cultural needs of the organization, then it will eventually start to slow down and the improvements will eventually start drying up. In fact, one of the biggest complaints I've heard about lean initiatives is that they're not sustainable. And I think that culture and leadership are a big reason for that happening. There's a copy of my book, and so if you'd like to dig deeper into some of the topics we'll be discussing today, feel free to find a copy of that where I go into a lot of these topics in more depth. To kind of start off, to kind of lay the foundation of what we'll be talking about today, I do want to go back to something that happened to me when I was at General Electric. This was very early in my career, well before the Toyota Way came out. Lean was known. Six Sigma was still known as, SPC at that time. TQM was just starting to get off the ground. So this was in the early days of continuous improvement. I started my full-time engagement with GE in their major appliance division. And in one of their factories, the one that made top mount refrigerators in Louisville, Kentucky, they had just completed a massive automation project that impacted 2/3 of the factory, really turning it upside down. Well, about a year after that project, there were still a lot of problems that were occurring. So GE corporate process audit, and they asked me to be a part of that team. And we generated reams and reams of data. But in our concluding presentation, we boiled it down to 3 key findings. The first key finding was that when you automate poorly designed processes, you're more than likely still going to have poorly designed processes. Automation is not a silver bullet that's going to fix all of your quality issues, throughput issues. There is a time and place for automation, but again, it's not going to fix all of your problems. The second conclusion is once you start getting into what we call the firefighting death spiral, it is very difficult to get out. We had so many fires that were happening all day long throughout the factory as a result of this massive project that most of the resources were consumed with firefighting. Very little time was being devoted to permanently fixing problems. The third conclusion we reached was that the employees on the shop floor were not very much engaged with all of these changes. So there was a real lack of worker buy-in and ownership to these problems that were occurring. So there was a great reduction in lack of trust, support, pride of workmanship as a result of this. So keep these 3 things in mind, because as throughout the presentation, you'll see some different things that I'll discuss that address these happenings, or these conclusions, I should say. The GE executives saw these recommendations and decided to put together the first of its kind, a dedicated group of resources to start trying to tackle some of these ongoing problems. And they asked me to lead that team. We created several shop floor teams with employees, first of their kind. Some were very successful and some were dismal failures. But there were enough successes to where the GE executive said, maybe there's something to this whole continuous improvement thing. And they asked me to go into kind of one of those dream jobs. It was a 2-year assignment where they asked me to go around collecting best practices from companies all around North America that were already doing some form of continuous improvement. And then once I learned these best practices, they asked me to come back and educate the executives on what I had discovered. So again, that's a lead into a lot of what we'll be discussing today, but I'd like to get some of your inputs to this part of the presentation. When I was getting ready to write my book, I went online and I asked a pretty simple question. In one word, what do you think is the main ingredient to sustaining and expanding an improvement initiative like Lean and Six Sigma? So what I'd like for you to do is go into the chat box and type in your result. What kind of words come to mind? And I'll read off some of them as we go along. So we have respect for people, communication, engagement, accountability, leadership, respect, culture, trust, engagement. So some pretty good words. Leaders coming up several times, buy-in, mentoring, empowerment's a good one, listening. So a lot of really great words there. Well, I ended up getting over 100,000 responses from this particular question, and I created a word cloud based on these responses. And this is what the results were. Leadership ended up coming up the most often, followed pretty closely by commitment. And then you can see some of the other things that you typed in the chat box, buy-in, culture, trust, communication. So again, pretty close to being, in alignment with what came up in the word cloud. But I want to talk about these first two, leadership and commitment. What does that exactly mean? And there's an old joke some of you may have heard. When talking about breakfast, the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. Now think about that for a moment. What does that exactly mean? Commitment. Well, I started thinking through that, and I put this scale together. On one end, we have the facade of commitment, the fakery of commitment, all the way to truly being committed. And what exactly does that look like? Well, at the top of this scale, I've actually had organizations tell me this, that they changed the titles of their supervisors to team leaders. And that was it. They were done. They now had teams. They now had an improvement initiative. And the executive said, yeah, that's all we need to do is change the title. I literally have had organizations tell me this. So clearly, that's on the far end of the facade scale. The next one down, and this is pretty common actually, where organizations will hire a Lean or Six Sigma expert and then just say, okay, we've done our part. We've brought in this person. They're going to fix all of our problems for us. They're going to make improvement happen. And now we can just wash our hands of the whole thing. And again, not too engaged. Third level down, executives now at this point are saying, all right, we'll go a little further. We'll actually put some resources towards training all of our employees in what Lean and Six Sigma is so that the employees can get engaged. But then where they fall short a lot of the times is that when it's time for the executives to go through the training, they'll usually come up and say, we don't really have 2 or 3 days to go through the full training. Can we just get the 1-hour executive overview? Because that's, we're really busy people. That's really all we need. Again, that to me is a big red flag that they're still not really committed. They're more the chicken, not the pig. Fourth one down, Now we're starting to get some engagement, you know, where executives are now willing to do some of the Gemba walks, right? Going out and actually walking the process and looking for improvement opportunities, engaging with some of the employees. They'll participate in updates from the teams to, you know, make sure that the teams are on track. And they may even participate in some of the teamwork. The problem, though, with stopping here is that, and I've seen this happen many times, where the Gemba walks will start to fade away over a period of time. You know, the executives get busy, the leaders get busy. The updates were weekly, then they became monthly, now they're quarterly, if at all. And the participation starts to fade away. And again, I think that's the root cause of why Lean and Six Sigma a lot of times isn't sustainable. So in order to be truly committed, the leadership team of that organization needs to take a step back and examine everything that they're doing. What are the key metrics that they're using to drive behavior for themselves and the whole organization? And the way you can tell which metrics are really important are the ones that lead to people being promoted. You know, so in other words, the executives could say, oh yeah, we believed 100% in teamwork. And then all of a sudden, the person that has the least amount of teamwork, you know, uses fear, uses manipulation of data, whatever, in order to get ahead, all of a sudden they get promoted. And the whole organization knows that this was a facade from the beginning. What are the values and the priorities that those values drive within the organization? Even how the organization is structured are all key ingredients to, you know, really examining, is the leadership team committed? So we break that down into these three circles. You know, a lot of times people will focus on the orange one. And my experience is that the blue one is critically important. If the leadership is not engaged, if they're not involved, if they're not committed, then it's not going to be sustainable. And then also the green one over here is also important. Why are you doing Lean? What's the purpose? What do you hope to get out of all these improvements and teamwork and so forth? So we'll focus for a little bit on this leadership circle, and then we'll talk some about the direction. Well, I'm a big fan of Dr. Ed Deming. When I was on that 2-year collection of best practices in the early 1990s, I got a chance to spend time with Dr. Deming. When he found out that I was from General Electric, he went out of his way to come talk to me and find, you know, because he wanted to know what we were doing in the realm of continuous improvement. So he had a huge influence on my career all throughout. And if you get a chance to read my book, you'll see a lot of his influence on different points that are made in the book. Dr. Deming wrote a book called Out of the Crisis, and in that book, he listed 14 points to running a new age organization, if you will. When I first presented these 14 points to a group of GE executives in the early 1990s, they could only agree on one of them as being relevant. We've come a long, long way since then, but even to today, there are still some of these 14 points that give executives heartburn. But if you look through this list, you'll notice a lot of the points deal directly with leadership, something about leadership. So even, you know, if you look at the second one as an example, basically it's saying that organizations need to adopt the new philosophy. You know, we are in a new economic age. Management must awaken to the challenge, must learn their responsibilities, and take on leadership for change. So again, the word leadership pops up quite a bit throughout this, but what exactly is a good leader? what characteristics make a good leader? And throughout the years, as I've thought about that, when you think of really good leaders, they run the gambit, right? You might have someone who is in the military in the middle of a war that is the biggest, pain, but the troops love them and they are able to really get the objectives won. Not in a nice way, but in an effective way. Well, okay, you could say that's a leader. A good coach for a winning football team, that's a good leader. The CEO of a nonprofit that relies on volunteers to get things done, that could be a good leader. So much different definitions, but all considered to be good leaders. And it's like, well, how is that possible to have so many definitions of what a good leader might actually look like? This is one of Dr. Deming's quotes: "A bad system will beat a good person every time." Now you'll notice he uses the word system, not process. So a system incorporates everything: leadership, teamwork, culture, training, good tooling, good materials. It's all of the above. And again, it starts with leadership. So I went about, when writing the book, defining different styles of leadership. And I discovered that it ranged on this spectrum from dictator to collaborator. Now, one point right up front I want to make clear is that, a lot of times we think of an old style manager. That person is not on this spectrum. So even on the dictator side, we're still talking about true leadership. And you'll see what I mean by that here in just a moment. So I divided this line into 4 leadership styles. The one closest to dictator is what I call a crisis leader. This is where a leader makes decisions with little to no input. And believe it or not, there is a time and place for that. If your organization is in deep trouble, you need a leader that's going to take charge, make things happen, make the tough decisions, take the responsibility for those decisions in order to get the organization out of that crisis. Now, again, a good leader knows that their objective is to move to the right of this spectrum. So you don't want to stay in crisis mode for very long. In fact, I've seen some organizations where they'll get a very effective crisis leader who stays in that for far too long, and then the organization starts to lose trust and rebel. So a good leader knows that the goal is to, as quickly as possible, move the organization to style 2. Now, what is style 2? Well, that's what I call the idea gathering leader. And this is a very important step on the growth of the organization. At this point, the leader is going to the employees that are closest to the process and asking for their input, asking for their ideas. Now, why is this important? Well, first, it allows the employees to start thinking about the future and start looking at their processes in a different way. It also allows them to contribute ideas without the responsibility of making the final decision. So it takes a lot of pressure off of the employees because they know the leader is still going to make the final decision. And if something goes wrong, it's still going to be on their shoulders. So it basically frees the employees up to share these ideas. Again, the goal, though, is to keep moving to the right. So after receiving ideas and doing that kind of work for a while, a good leader knows that as soon as possible, the goal is to start putting teams together of employees that will then actually start recommending decisions and final conclusions. They may not make the final decision. That may still be up to the leader, but they're still being asked to make a recommendation for a path forward. And again, that's a critical step because the team needs to feel confident that their recommendations are being listened to, being heard, and that the leader is going to have their back. Now, there's a lot that happens between style 2 and 3. There's a lot of training that needs to take place, training in the basic problem solving skills, root cause analysis, that sort of thing. The other thing that I'm a firm believer in for style 3 is that you also need some trained neutral facilitators that can help the teams get off the ground, can help them develop their abilities to work together and make tough decisions. And then finally, the goal is to get to style 4. And this is where you have fully empowered teams of employees that are now well trained. They're used to working together. They've had several successes under their belt. And basically, they're empowered to deal with problems on an ongoing basis. So as soon as an issue appears within their part of the process, they're now empowered to work together to figure out how to solve that problem, both in a short-term and a permanent way. Now, I can tell you, I've worked with several organizations that have made it to that level, style 4, and it's amazing what they can deal with. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, to highlight these different leadership styles, I've actually put together an actual interactive activity. And if someday we are able to meet in person in an actual workshop, then maybe you can participate in this, what I call the leadership experiment. But I did want to kind of give you the gist of it so that you can see how it fits in with these 4 leadership styles. I asked for a leader volunteer and 8 volunteer workers. The workers are actually taken out of the room and they're blindfolded, so they can't see what's going on. Meanwhile, the leader is given an objective. And once the leader acknowledges that they understand what the objective is, we bring the 8 volunteers that are blindfolded back into the room and have them sit in a chair, and they're given a rope. And the task that the leader is trying to accomplish involves these 8 workers either pulling or releasing their rope. So in the first round, the workers have no idea what's going on, and the leader is restricted to just providing the commands of either pulling the rope or releasing the rope. So the leader will be like, all right, you 3 on this side of the room, I need you to pull your rope, while the 2 in the back, you need to release your rope. And by doing that, he's manipulating some things that lead to the accomplishment of an objective. In that first round, when the objective is met, it usually takes about 5 to 5.5 minutes to achieve the objective. But as soon as the objective is met, the audience usually erupts in applause. All right? And the leader will even bow, like, thank you, thank you, thank you, and basically take a lot of the credit. Well, then I explain, all right, we're going to do this a second time. But in the second time, I asked the leader to explain to the workers what the objective is. Why are they pulling the ropes? What's the rope connected to, and how does that work exactly? So the leader lays out a vision of this is what success looks like. Then I'll ask the 8 workers, do you understand the objective? And they'll usually say, yeah, I understand it. Then I ask them to take the blindfolds off and turn their chairs around so they can see what's going on. And then we time them a second time. Well, usually with very little instruction from the leader, the 8 workers are able to work together, pulling and releasing their ropes because they can see now what's going on. And usually they're able to achieve the objective in about 15 seconds compared to 5.5 minutes. Again, the audience usually erupts in applause. And this time you'll see the 8 workers high-fiving each other and a sense of pride starting to well up in them. Well, then as a debrief, I'll ask the audience, which style of leadership was shown in round 1? And they'll say, style 1, the crisis leader, the dictator. The leader's basically making all the decisions. And then I'll ask a very pertinent question. I'll say, when you erupted in applause at the end of round 1, who were you applauding for? And there'll be silence for a little while, and then a few people will start speaking up and saying, well, I guess we were applauding for the leader. And then I'll ask the 8 workers, in that first round, when you accomplished the objective and the audience started applauding, how did that make you feel? And their response is we didn't even know what was going on. We had no clue what we were trying to accomplish. So actually it felt kind of bad. It's like, why are they applauding? We don't even know what's happening. Well, then I'll ask in the second round, the audience, same thing. Who are you applauding for? And they'll say, oh, we were applauding for the whole team. And I'll ask the workers, well, how did that make you feel? And they'll be like, it was great. Oh my goodness, we accomplished the task in a fraction of the time from the first round. And it really felt good. In fact, I even have some of the participants, they'll ask me, can we do it again? Because I think we can even beat 15 seconds. And you can tell that sense of pride of workmanship, pride of accomplishment is very high. Now, this is the really hard question I ask at the very end. I ask the audience, all right, which of the 2 leaders do you think would be most likely to be promoted in today's typical organization? And man, they hate answering that question. But after a lot of reluctant thinking about it, they'll say, yeah, I hate to admit it, but probably the one from round 1. Because they seem to be the busiest. They were the most in control, the most in command. And it's like, well, wait a minute. It took round 1 leader 5.5 minutes to accomplish the task, whereas round 2 leader got it done in 15 seconds. Why would round 1 leader be promoted? And it was like, well, in round 2, the leader was really more of a coach and cheerleader and kind of melted into the background. So yeah, probably round 1 leader would be promoted. And that's, when the light bulb went off for me, and why I added the words to the title of my book, Defining a New Normal of Leadership. Because right now, if we really want to change the culture, you got to examine, all right, which type of leader are you going to promote? Are you going to reward? So if you think about it, there's 4 ways to gain productivity with your workers. For years and years and years, we used fear. Now, you may not think that you're using fear, but every time you set a goal with the understanding that if you miss the goal, something bad's going to happen to you, that's using fear. Some are just outright using fear. Hey, if you don't do your job in this way, in this time, you're going to get fired. So there's, that fear is always present. But what we've discovered is that that's not going to lead to trust and teamwork. In fact, just the opposite happens. A second way of getting productivity is the use of what I call bribes, right? Hey, if you achieve this objective, we'll give you a bonus. We'll give you something. The problem with bribes, though, is that in order to get the same results, you've got to continuously up those bribes in order for them to be effective. So at the beginning, it might be something small, but a year later, it could be, hey, we'll give you a new car if you hit the objective in order to have the same impact. So bribes over time tend to not work that well. The third way of gaining productivity is to actually improve processes, the things that a lot of us are involved with. And that does have a good positive impact to productivity. But I want to introduce a fourth way, and that's what I call enthusiastic productivity, where you've actually engaged the workers and there's that sense of pride of workmanship, like in that second round of the rope exercise. And then all of a sudden you get a group of employees that are like, how can we do it even better? How can we do it even faster? And I think that is a real key for sustaining Lean and Six Sigma, and why it's so important to keep your employees engaged throughout. Now, in order to have that happen, the leaders have to be willing to migrate to that style 4 leadership and be on that path. So that's the leadership bubble. I'm going to shift over to the green bubble for just a few minutes, and then we'll wrap up and I'll take some questions. The direction bubble. Most of you have probably heard these 4 things, but I want to share how important this is with what we're talking about now. Mission, vision, strategy, and values. You know, mission is basically why do we exist as an organization? And most companies have that. Most organizations have that. It's even probably on your business card, you know, the mission statement. Vision, though, I think is the area that most organizations fall well short of. And basically it's how do you describe a future that will inspire and excite every single person within that organization? And that's up to the leadership team to accomplish. Now, they need to get input from a lot of different sources. They need to get input from their employees, from their customers, from their suppliers, from their people who make the equipment, from lots of different sources. But it's all up to the leadership team to say, all right, this is where we're headed. And I'll explain a little bit more why that's important in just a moment. Strategy is basically how do you turn that vision into reality? What actions need to happen to make that vision move forward? And then finally, values. How would you describe your culture? And this is important, what evidence is there that that value is real? All right. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into 2 of those 4, vision and values. For vision, in the book of Proverbs, there's an interesting passage that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. One time I was doing this class and I opened up a fortune cookie the night before, and this is what was in it. Vision is not seeing things as they are, but as they will be. Thought that was pretty profound. But this is my favorite from Joel Barker. He wrote that a vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision just passes the time. And vision with action can change the world. I think too often most organizations, especially in this time of COVID, are stuck in this second one, right? Action without vision just passes the time. We hope we can get through the month. We hope we can get through the quarter. We hope we can get through the year. And there's no real vision as to where you're going. And without that, you're just basically turning the pages on the calendar. One of the most famous vision examples is when John F. Kennedy spoke to the nation and said this, right? I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. And that was in 1961. And at that time, there was very little understanding of how that would happen. But you'll notice that it starts with, I believe that this nation should commit itself. So in other words, he's sharing with the nation that this is his vision. He understands it's not their vision yet. So over the next year, he does a lot to promote this vision throughout the country. And a year later, he gives another speech. And you'll notice how the words change quite a bit, right? So this is in 1962. And he said, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. So you'll notice he's changed the words to we choose, which means, hey, I now have the buy-in. I now have the commitment from the nation to make this a reality. And we go from it being a vision or a dream to something concrete that we can actually get behind and do. The other thing I wanted to talk about real quick is values. One of the ways to broach this subject with a leadership team is to actually have them go through an activity. In my book, I actually list about 30 or so values. There's plenty of them out there, but basically I put them on index cards, and then I asked the leaders of the organization to sort the index cards from those values they considered to be the most critical for the organization to those that they considered to be the least valuable. It's very tough exercise because you look at all these values and you would say, well, they're all important, but this is a prioritization exercise. So it's important, to say, okay, which values are really, really critical for the running of our organization. Now, how do we define what is a critical value? Basically, it's where would you draw the line in these, 30 values that you've prioritized that would say, if they don't have that value, I probably would not hire that person. No matter how good their resume is, no matter how good their experiences are, if they don't have that particular value, then we're not going to hire them. That would be considered a critical value. And then finally, this is a really tough discussion with the leadership team a lot of times, is what evidence is there that you're actually embracing these values? And if they can't come up with concrete examples of where they've embraced that value, then that value is a wannabe. We want that, but we currently don't have it. And then you have to have another whole discussion about what needs to change in order to make that value come to reality. So to give you a sense for how this exercise goes, on this next screen, I'm going to list 12 values, and I'd like, and Jeff's going to put a poll up, and I want you to click on which one you would say is the most critical value, the most important. They're all important, but which is the most important? So we have teamwork, humility and thankfulness, continuous improvement mindset, blame the process, not the people, communication and listening, persistence and perseverance, respect for others, optimism and passion, inspirational, strive to learn on a continuous basis, acceptance of failure, customer-centric, and diversity and inclusion. Now, I'm going to take two of these away. One, because these are the two that usually come up in the top two. That's customer-centric and diversity and inclusion. So you cannot vote for one of those. We'll assume those are already in the top two. And I want you to choose from the remaining 10. So Jeff, if you'll go ahead and put the poll up. So go ahead and pick what of the remaining 10, which do you think is the most critical for a successful improvement initiative? And it's not so easy, is it? It's tough, right? When you have to narrow it down. All right. So it looks like the next one on our list would be respect for others. That got quite a few votes, almost 50% of the votes, followed pretty closely by teamwork. Now, if you think about it, those two kind of go hand in hand, right? If you don't have respect for others, then it's hard to have good teamwork. So you can imagine some of the conversations that you can get pulled into when having or when a leadership team goes through this activity. So to kind of pull all this together, how do those 4 things fit on our leadership spectrum here? Well, in order to get to style 1, everyone in the organization needs to know what the mission is. But they really don't need to know much beyond that, because the leader's making all the decisions. In order to get the organization to style 2, the leaders have to have a clear vision that everybody understands and has bought into. Otherwise, how do I know what ideas to offer to make things better if I don't know where we're going? So vision is critical for style 2. Style 3 is you're putting your teams together. It's important to have your strategy developed. Otherwise, you might start having some teams that are working on worthless things that really don't contribute to the vision of where the organization is going. And in order to reach style 4, you've got to have a good set of values clearly defined. One last thing real quick. I get asked a lot about organizing for improvement. I do talk about this in the book. So if you want more information on this, you can go there. But when I was at GE and I was asked to actually implement a lot of these things, I was given these 3 departments: the quality engineering group, industrial engineering group, and the manufacturing engineering group. And these 3 groups absolutely hated each other. I mean, they didn't talk to each other. They didn't cooperate. They absolutely hated. So to break down these barriers, these silos, I basically took these 3 organizations, consolidated it into one organization, and we called it Process Innovation Engineers, or PIEs for short. Dave Harry told me I had to put a pie on this screen, so there's your pie, Dave. So what exactly is a process innovation engineer? Well, it's basically someone who wears all 3 of those hats, and they're assigned a specific part of process, like in this case, the paint system. And what do? Well, they partner with the order fulfillment folks. They focus on building ownership within the employees that work in that particular process. This is a full-time job. It's not a project, so they could be there for 2-3 years. And their objective is to build a system with the help of the employees that provides the best safety, quality, and throughput. And when I've led these types of organizations, I've explained that the goal is to spend about 50% of your time on the shop floor actually talking to operators and working on short-term, quick improvements. And about 50% of your time needs to be focused on doing project work and longer term step function kind of improvements. This is one of those companies that I worked with that went through all of what we've talked about. They got to style 4. They went to the process innovation engineering type organizational structure. When we started down this path, if you ordered one of their products, you received it in 8 to 12 weeks. It's basically that exit device that you can see on the door there. We only hit that window 70% of the time, and when the customer actually opened the box, there was a 20% chance that something would be wrong or missing in the box. We only did about 10 changeovers a day, but we produced over 10,000 different items, so you can imagine how big the batches were. And this is my favorite metric. We were producing 1,300 exit devices a day, plus or minus 1,000. 3 years later, after we had accomplished all of these things, and again, this was a step function improvement, but we saw results throughout the 3 years. But at the end of 3 years, when you ordered one of these exit devices, we guaranteed 1 to 2 day deliveries, and that was from we actually made it during that time. It was not from inventory. We were able to hit that objective 99% of the time. When you open the box, there was less than a 0.01% chance of something being wrong. We had gotten our setups down to single minutes. So we were doing 250 averaging setups a day. And look at this one. We were producing 2,300 devices a day, plus or minus 1. Didn't matter if it was a Monday or a Friday. We still produced 2,300 plus or minus 1 every day. Now, we had big scoreboards throughout the plant that showed these metrics. And the first time we hit 100% in all of our metrics, the entire plant erupted in spontaneous applause. It was one of those days in manufacturing I'll never forget. And it was amazing to see the sense of pride, the sense of accomplishment, because all those employees knew they had a huge role in achieving these kind of results. And we ended up becoming one of the favorite places to work within our community because people had heard how much the employees were engaged, how much trust there was, and how great the culture and environment was. So that's my presentation, a lot to cover. Hopefully it gave you a sense for a few of the things that are important to me and important to the success of a Lean and Six Sigma initiative. Jeff, do we have some questions?
We do. So before we start taking the questions, anyone else who has questions, use that Q&A box to enter them in, and we'll try to get as many as we can answered in the next couple of minutes. First question, how do you sell to leadership the necessity to review and refine the mission, vision, value statements from a booklet to actionable and measurable statements as the foundation of a Lean initiative?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the first question to your leadership team is any of that really defined? And defined in a way that's usable. You know, in one company I worked in, we would spend a month every summer putting together a binder that was our strategy. And once we pitched it to the CEO, that binder went on the shelf and was never looked at again. That's not what I'm talking about here. It's got to be something that is actionable, that's usable. And again, it also has something to do with relinquishing control, right? If the leadership team is not willing to share the vision of where the company is going, that should be a tell that they're really not committed to making all this happen. So I'd say the first step is to have that discussion. Do we even have a vision? Do we even know where we're going? And then second is all right, who has bought into that? You know, how well known is it, and how can we promote it even more? Those would be my first two steps.
How do you best equip leaders who are distributed and not getting daily feedback on their actual behaviors?
So the leaders are not getting feedback, or they're not giving feedback?
I believe it's so there's another statement that goes with this. So leader says, Joe, you need to be a category 4 leader. So how do you create the support system in a distributed organization?
Gotcha. Yeah. So how do you start this process? So obviously, if you're in the CEO chair or the vice president of a division chair, then it's a lot easier, right? Because you would be the one that would be making this decision to go down this path. And I've actually had some CEOs do this. You know, they've actually read my book. And one CEO even said, gosh, the whole time I was reading your book, I was thinking, this isn't me. You know, that there's a villain in the book in the story part. And he's like, this isn't me. But then once he got done reading the book and started thinking about it, he said for the next 2 weeks, all I could see was me acting like the villain in the book. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that, you know, I'm really not committed to this. I'm really, I'm not doing the things that are needed to make this a reality. The other thing that's kind of interesting about the book, like I said, it's written in a story format. At least half the chapter is, and then the other half is written as practical applications. The story part follows 2 executives. One's name's Frank Smith. He's the villain, and he does everything the wrong way, the facade way. The other's, his name is Jim Brown, and he is trying to do it the right way, but he inherits a staff that doesn't want to change. And so you see some of his trials and tribulations. What's interesting about the story part that goes throughout the book, and it is all based on reality. I've lived everything that's in the story part, is it basically gives you something to discuss in a very non-threatening way. So instead of saying, you know, hey, you, Jeff, are Frank Smith, it's, don't you think, Jeff, that that Frank Smith character is a real pain? And how do we keep from becoming Frank Smiths? It really helps to open the door to some tough conversations that you know, you may not be able to have if you're afraid that you know, a finger is going to get pointed at you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Coming from a diversified manufacturing organization, at what level do you suggest developing and deploying vision?
So I think it needs to happen at, well, actually, it needs to start at the highest level. So, you know, a CEO needs to help craft a vision for the whole organization. And then each vice president may need to take that vision and say, okay, how do we now incorporate that into our vision? Now, if you don't have the support of the CEO or the you know, divisional vice president, but you're the leader of a particular department, start there. What's the vision for your department? And where would you want your department to go? And at least you've got something to rally your own employees around, and give them a sense of where your department is heading.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the leadership participation in the door device example that you gave?
Yeah, it was great. In fact, the person who was the general manager of that business, he and I have become close friends through the years. I actually worked for him. I had the process innovation engineers working for me. So this is back before I became a consultant. And we've stayed in touch throughout, you know, the last 20 years. And he actually was a proofreader for my book. So it's been a great relationship. And I remember early on, his first day was my first day. So I had just been hired, he had just been hired. And we you know, built that bond early on. And you know, very early in the process, he said, John, he said, you know, I had just come from GE, so I'd had some experience in all this. He said, you know, I'm new to this whole continuous improvement thing. I need you to be my coach. I need you to help, you know, help me understand what my role is and what I need to do. And I tell you, I also give him a tremendous amount of credit, because this particular company was already doing fairly well. It was profitable. Even with those horrible metrics I shared, it was still doing fairly well. So for him to take, you know, go out on a limb and actually make a lot of significant changes to what was considered to be kind of the crown jewel of the company, took a lot of guts. And we took a good business, and through the use of the employee engagement and all that, it became a fantastic business.
So we have time for maybe one more question. You gave a little bit of an example of this with the hypotheticals of how do we not become the I'm going to call
Frank
him the
Smith.
evil, the Frank
Yeah,
Smith.
the Frank Smith.
So,
yeah.
But how can, or how have you seen, or how can organizations use your book to address these changes needed to become excellent?
So yeah, again, hopefully if you get a chance to read it, you know, the story portion, like I said, kind of walks the reader through all these steps. And there are some setbacks. I mean, it's not a smooth journey. Even for Jim Brown, the good character in the book, you know, he gets the organization all the way to style 3, and then all of a sudden a massive crisis hits the company, and he has to go back to style 1 for a period of time. But he explains to the organization why he has to do that, and commits to them to get back to style 3 as quickly as possible. And then, like I said, each chapter also has practical applications. How do you apply what was in the story to your real world activities? So hopefully by reading through those, you can then say, all right, this gives me a sense for how I can actually take what the characters are going through and apply it to my job or my position in the organization.
Right, well, I think we're out of time. So I really appreciate your sharing of your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience with the AME community and the Lean and Continuous Improvement community, and appreciate not just today, but also as you join our Tuesday idea exchanges. We have a couple other questions that have come in that we haven't been able to answer live during our allotted time, but perhaps we might be able to address those when we share the deck. So you and I can chat about that. Thanks to everyone who has participated, who's been on this webinar. We really appreciate it. We have, an incredible amount of content coming up and other events, workshops, virtual tours through AME. So if you go to ame.org/events, you'll see all of those, including a link to our conference, which is October 27th through 29th. And I encourage you to check those out, and hope to see you at an upcoming tour, workshop, or webinar. So thanks a lot to everyone.